following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared in the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
It is time to talk about money. The answer about money. That's the program today. So I had a friend, it goes back maybe 25 years ago. He was a travel agent, and it was the perfect job for him. He loved to travel, loved to see the world. He and his wife would go off to all these distant esoteric places, exotic places, take pictures. Back in those days, they took film camera, took all those pictures. He felt he had absolute job security because when it came time to plan travel, somebody needed to know all the airlines, they needed to know the hotels, they needed to know all these destinations. He had to have this wealth of knowledge, and he kept saying he had the perfect job. He was going to be doing this for the rest of his life. Little did he know. Do you remember all the travel agents? There used to be one on every street corner. There used to be dozens in the malls. Do you remember seeing a travel agent lately? You know, I used to go into Tower Records in Bellevue and pick out, and Seattle too, and pick out albums, pick out CDs. You know, between 2003 and 2007, 2,700 record stores disappeared, just went away. Remember the time when Seattle had two papers? We had a morning paper and an evening paper. We had the PI in the morning and the Seattle Times in the evening. Remember those papers had a whole section on business? They had a stock market page. They had a whole section on classified advertising. They had local columnists like Emmett Watson, who used to write a column almost every day. They had their own staff of reporters. You know, today we have one newspaper. It doesn't have a business section. It has a couple pages in the back of the paper. It doesn't have a classified advertising section. It's gotten smaller, and we have only one paper. You know, and most of their articles are taken from Associated Press, not local reporters. All that says is life is changing, business changes, and the focus of this program is insight into what's happening and to give you listeners more information on the future and change. And I believe to make money, you have to be ahead of the curve instead of behind the curve. You have to be looking toward the future and not in the rearview mirror. Seems like a funny segue to start out and talk about energy. But anyway, we've got that to talk about. Energy is an industry which is $7 trillion per year. Compare that to where we are now. We're on the radio. But if you take all of media, TV, books, movies, all of that is a $1 trillion per year industry. Energy is $7 trillion. And for years, I've been talking about the issue of energy and climate change. Tom Friedman wrote a book that was called That Used to Be Us, and he talked about the issue coming up, climate change versus energy, and how to manage the need for energy with a rising impact on the climate. We're in a period of globalization and adoption of free growth of energy. I've been talking for almost a decade about the supercycle. 93% of the world's middle class will live in emerging nations by 2030. 93%. The middle class, of course, is a broad range of people, but it means people move from subsistence to actually buying things like cars and smartphones and lattes. You know, the current methods of cheap energy, excluding hydro, and alternative energy involve emissions into the atmosphere. And there's going to be an enormous challenge of continuing to grow in terms of energy and our climate. You know, on one side, you have to look at the climate change, and it's become a political controversy, but the reality is 99% of scientists agree and study we have climate change. And just have to think about a few weeks ago when we had all the forest fires, and I talked about the forest fires and the increasing number of forest fires worldwide that are happening. That's happening because of the change in climate. We live surrounded by facilities that produce carbon and leave carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And I use the example oftentimes, use it again today, of when you drive your car, you have the air conditioning on in today's climate. You drive it to the store, the grocery store, or the mall. You park it, and the car's at a nice 69 or 70 degrees, whatever you keep your air conditioning on. Get out of the car. It's parked outside. You spend an hour inside the store, and you come out. Even if it's only 75 or 80 degrees outside, the temperature inside the car is 90 or 100 degrees. There's a reason for that, because the sun is shining down on the car, and for most of that time, a lot of the sun rays will bounce out of the car, but some of it is captured inside the car. And that's why your car heats up. That's why even on a 75 degree or 80 degree day, the temperature inside the car is going to be 90 or 100 degrees because it's capturing the sun energy. The same is true with the carbon emissions. As we build up more and more carbon in the atmosphere, that carbon is preventing all the sun rays bouncing off the earth and back into the atmosphere. And over a period of time, we're seeing an increase in the amount of carbon, and we're seeing an increase in the temperature of the earth. We're seeing heavier snows, we're seeing wetter rains, we're seeing heavier storms in a lot of places. We're seeing heat waves and heavy snowfalls. We're seeing floods and avalanches. We're seeing forest fires. We're seeing landslides, and we're seeing hurricanes. We're seeing global weirding. Because you have more heat, that means more water is evaporated into the atmosphere, which creates more snow, creates more rain. So we live in that time. But the other side of the equation is it's not just stopping energy growth. We have to deal with both. You know, as the world increases, as the number of people increase, our energy consumption goes up. Think about it. As influence increases, think about the TV and the kitchen appliances and the businesses and the computers and all the electronic things that we're using. All those require more energy. And as we've seen the world population, as we've seen poverty reduced, that means people are buying smartphones, they're buying cars, they're buying electrical appliances, they're buying toasters, they're buying microwaves. All those things require more energy, and as we require more energy, we require more production. While coal supplies over 30% of all energy, you know, China's starting up 2 coal plants every single month. Coal actually is around 50% of energy production. Alternative energy is a small percentage, growing rapidly, but a small percentage. Natural gas, on the other hand, burns clean, less than 30%, versus oil. It's price competitive with coal. And unlike coal, you can turn natural gas-fired turbines on and off. Which brings me to the question of petroleum. This is where I really wanted to get to. If you look at petroleum, what happens with petroleum, in most cases, you're taking long dead remains of plankton and algae, those little microscopic growths. When they die, they sink into a body of water, mud, and that mud is attacked by millions of bacteria, and over millions of years, what you begin to get is that mud becomes muck, becomes soft rock, and you get layer upon layer of soft rock. And that turns into a waxy substance called kerogen. And with enough heat and enough pressure, kerogen turns into petroleum. And over thousands of years, the rock strata begins to push in. It's a porous rock. And that porous rock begins to push together, and you begin to form pools. Those pools are formed under a rock in which the oil can't escape or the petroleum can't escape. It's called the cap rock, as if it's an inventive name, cap rock. That cap rock prevents the oil from moving up. But what happens is if you drill down and drew through the cap rock, if you just drilled through the cap rock, you'd get a gusher because of the pressure. To get petroleum, what they do is they drill down through the cap rock into a pool of oil and extract the oil. It's a downward drilling. And that's the story of petroleum. We use petroleum in a lot of places. We think about it in terms of gasoline and airline fuel and heating. But if you look at a tube of toothpaste, you'll see 4 or 5 different petroleum products on a tube of toothpaste. Petroleum is everywhere. But things are changing. The times they're changing. If you look at what's happened in the last decade, we've reached a point where we're fracking and we're digging into shale. Shale doesn't need any of that of petroleum oil. We're going to come back after this commercial break. Don't go away, because the times that are changing, this is going to have a significant impact on what we do.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I've been talking about petroleum. Petroleum is produced over millions of years with bacteria attacking plankton and algae, forming into pools with a great deal of pressure, a great deal of heat. Shale is not like that at all. Fracking is not like that at all. You don't need any of that. Shale rock is not porous. So any petroleum that goes into shale rocks doesn't form into pools. If you drill into shale, what you get is very small pockets of petroleum. Very, very small pockets that are maybe a micron in diameter. Think about that. A micron is like the size of a human hair, the diameter of a human hair. That's the kind of holding in shale rock. You have very little. You drill into shale rock, you might get a drop or two of petroleum, and that's it. So the only way to get oil from shale is to turn traditional drilling on its head. While traditional drilling, you drilled vertically and you drill down. When you're drilling for shale, you drill horizontally. If you're drilling a hole into the ground and drilling for normal petroleum, you're drilling a shaft that's maybe 10, 12 feet in diameter. If you're drilling for shale, you're drilling along a tube that's a couple miles long, under the surface. What you have with shale is all these little tiny pockets of petroleum. And you can almost think about it like drilling or like ravioli and lasagna. If you dig into ravioli, you dig from the top down. But on lasagna, what you're doing is if you want to move along between the layers of pasta, that's what shale is like. Between the layers of pasta. That's how you get shale. You drill along probably for 2 miles or maybe 4 or 5 miles on a horizontal basis. But then you have all these little tiny pockets where you have petroleum, a drop or 2 drops of petroleum. So to force the petroleum out, what you do is you pump water into that hole, that drilling area. You pump water and sand, and you put it under a great deal of pressure. You know that if you blow up a balloon and then put a lot of pressure on it, Gas compresses. Liquid doesn't compress. If you push and put force on a liquid, it forces it out. So that's the idea of fracking, or using the hydraulics to force that liquid into those rocks. And what happens is you begin to form small fissures and small cracks in the rock. And those cracks lead to leaving the petroleum out. Now you're putting water and sand into that. And you have a big forceful pump that's pushing a lot of pressure. So you're putting a lot of pressure, you're cracking the rocks. And then the water forces the petroleum out. You have water and sand in the rocks. And as you take the pressure off and pull the water out, what you end up with is the sand staying in the pores of the rock, in those little cracks. And coming out is oil. Coming out is not necessarily oil. Coming out, in large part, is natural gas. If you look at the known reserves of petroleum in the world, it's about 1/5 of the total petroleum available. If you look at what we have in terms of fracking, it's almost 4/5 of the known petroleum reserves. And it has a huge advantage. It has a very huge advantage. In the U.S. alone, the reserves for shale, the known reserves, are greater than all the petroleum reserves of Saudi Arabia and Russia combined. We have a huge amount, and it's natural gas. And if you remember where I started this whole thing with climate change, I said the things we burn for climate change, the coal, the oil to produce electricity, they put a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Natural gas puts less than 30% of the same amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It burns clean. It burns cost-wise equivalent to coal. And the advantage of coal has always been a low price. Natural gas burns the same way. There's another advantage to natural gas, and that's that the turbines can be turned on and off. Think about solar. Solar doesn't produce energy half the time. Half the time it's night, and during night they produce nothing. So now think of a world in which half the energy is produced with solar and half is produced with natural gas. That's the way that we're moving. That has tremendous political consequences. It also has consequences for investment. It's a time to look forward, not to look in the rearview mirror. We're in a process of change. The times, they are a-changing. And it's important to understand the entire energy consumption is $7 trillion a year. Over the next few years, almost $35 trillion will be invested by the year 2050 in alternative energy and different forms of energy. All of that is money for investment, but don't get caught in investing in old technology. The idea is to be ahead of the curve. There's a reason why the bump was Bob Dylan's "The Times They Are A-Changing," because that's the time we live in. We live in that time not just for energy, but our consumption of beverages is also changing. And that leads to my guests today, Katie Enger and Ron Lloyd of San Juan Seltzer. Welcome to the program.
Thank for having us.
So why don't we start with your background? Katie, let's start with your background.
Okay, I was an elementary school teacher most of my whole life. I taught bilingual Spanish immersion in Los Angeles, and then I moved to Virginia, and then I taught at Puesta del Sol in Bellevue, Washington. Mm-hmm. And after that, I was a stay-at-home mom for my 4 children, and last year I started a event company with my friend.
But you were in the San Juan sometime.
The San Juans, yes. My parents have a home there. It's my favorite spot.
And you were drinking something.
I was drinking Huckleberry vodka and soda on the deck. Why not? It's a perfect spot.
And you had an idea.
And I had an idea that it would be great in a can.
And so was born.
So was born the San Juan Seltzer. Yeah.
So, Ron, let's go with your background.
Well, as unfortunately, I wasn't there for that inspiration night, but I've known Katie and Kyle Enger for so long, and I know them, I love their kids, And my background is in the beverage space. I've been with some of the largest and some of the smallest beverage and food companies in the world, having worked on little brands that people hadn't heard of at the time called Capri Sun, which is now a household name and a multi-billion-dollar brand. I've been in the water business. I've been in the beer and wine business. I've been in the powdered soft drink business, again, working for little tiny startups and large companies like Procter & Gamble, Kraft Foods, and Constellation Brands.
So how did you connect with Katie?
Well, it was kind of funny. Having coached with her husband in multiple sports over the years in the neighborhood, Kyle came to me one day and said, hey, basically, we know you're a beverage guru. We've got an idea that we'd love to, bounce off you. And at that time, it kind of told the story of Katie's inspiration, not only with her, but with all of her friends, and had this idea of creating a huckleberry-infused vodka type beverage to compete against this emerging category called spiked sparkling waters or spiked sparkling seltzers. And what turned
our little chat turned into
yeah, it started out, I was doing other things at the time, as you can imagine, and went from us talking for a half hour once a week to 2 hours a day to 6 hours to, hey, would you join our board, to, hey, will you come in and really help us figure out a course for this thing.
And so you did.
I did, and I haven't regretted it. And what's really special about this is we really are like a family. It's a unique experience, and our family's growing as our brand's growing, and everybody that's associated with our company has worked with me on other ventures at least twice before. So to be able to work with people that we not only have had successes, but we've had failures together. We are people that know what's important. We know to keep an eye on the prize. And at the end of the day, these are the people that we've known each other so long that we even finish one another's sentences. And that goes across the board with the Engers as well.
So what we're seeing, from my perspective, we're seeing real changes in the beverage space. We're seeing beer decline. We have Ben Smith of Cadence on talking about the wine industry, and wine sales have flattened. We're seeing flavored liqueurs, not liqueurs, but flavored
malt
distilled
beverages,
drinks,
and absolutely across the board.
growing dramatically. And in your category, tell us how they're doing.
Well, we're sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And we chose a category that is flat out the fastest growing beverage alcohol category out there right now. It's growing over 500% this year alone. There's not a retailer, a restaurateur, an operator, an events company owner that can successfully have an event without having a representative from the category there. In our case, we want it to be a higher quality, handcrafted product like ours, like San Juan Seltzer. And, that's kind of the goal of ours, to get that message out and really tell the story how we're different than everything else. But most important, we are hitting the requirements of the consumer. The consumers want things, as you said, that are lighter, more refreshing, lower in calorie. When you go out there, you see people drinking vodka sodas,
right,
tequila sodas.
Steering clear of the wine and the beer. And
exactly. And ours is the lowest calorie option out there. We're all natural, gluten-free, and each one of our flavors is inspired only by flavors from the Pacific Northwest.
We're going to come back and talk about that after the commercial break. I mean, just finishing the commercial break, I was at dinner with some friends the other night, looked around the restaurant to see how many people had ordered a bottle of wine. There's almost no one that was ordering wine with their dinner. They were all having something else. So we're going to come back and talk about that. We're going to talk about San Juan Seltzer. Don't go away. We've got a lot to cover, and we've got so much to talk about before the end of the show. What you're going to hear is great, and if you miss any of the show, you can pick it up at adamsfinancialconcepts.com. So don't go away. Stay with us. We've got a lot of program to finish.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So, I'm here with Katie Enger and Ron Lloyd. We've been talking about San Juan Seltzer, and let's dig into what San Juan Seltzer is itself. So go ahead.
Well, San Juan Seltzer, I think it's the most refreshing new light beverage out there. That's what all my friends are starting to drink, and definitely steering away from the calorie and feeling heavy. They just wanted something lighter, and so I'd love you to try some.
Okay. So tell me about it. How many calories in the...
So it's 85 calories, so it's the lowest calorie option out there right now.
And tell me about the flavor. I'm looking at a raspberry cran.
A raspberry cran, that is a great one. It definitely is a raspberry first, right when you taste it, and when you open it, you can smell the raspberries right away, and then right at the end, you get a cranberry taste.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me about all the flavors.
Yeah, we decided to do something different in a world where all of our competitors are out there fighting for the typicals, as we call them, the lemons, the limes. We wanted to do something entirely different. We wanted to focus on flavors that are inspired by fruit of the Pacific Northwest. Katie talked about raspberry and cran, but the inspiration was huckleberry. I mean, huckleberries throughout the Northwest, you can't go anywhere, the Snoqualmie Lodge, without seeing huckleberry jam or huckleberry something on the menu. The idea of a Fuji apple, we're the only Fuji apple or apple of any kind out there in the category. And the idea there is, let's face it, there's a game every year between two colleges, one in Seattle, one in Pullman, and called the Apple Cup. Washington's known for apples. What better to come out with a flavor of the apple? And it kind of builds on to what Bob Dylan said, though, about times are a-changin', as you mentioned earlier. Consumers want products that are lower in calorie and taste good and are unique and are different. They want to consume products that come from companies with authentic stories and a soul. So that's what all of our flavors about. The Fuji apple in particular, we're really targeting something. We've seen recently kind of the growth of the cider category, where those beverages are very high in calorie, very filling. And now there's an alternative to that. We're just 85 calories, very light, very refreshing. You can drink more than one or two of them without getting filled up.
Mm-hmm. So if you look at the category in general, who dominates the count? Where was the category before San Juan Seltzer?
Yeah, this category has been dominated by the 800-pound gorillas of the beverage alcohol space. You've got Anheuser-Busch with their brand called Spike Seltzer. You've got Sam Adams with a brand called Truly, and then you've got Mark Anthony Brands, the makers of Mike's Hard Lemonade, with a brand called White Claw. And so those three brands have really been driving kind of the awareness, doing some of the pioneering and the heavy lifting before we got there. And now what we're trying to do is leverage the success that they've had building that awareness and creating trial, but doing it in a way that really, that we set ourselves apart. And
your flavors are very different from theirs.
Yeah, entirely. We used to say if Katie can't grow it outside her kitchen window in either Bellevue, Washington, or up in the San Juans, it's not going to be in our product.
I have to tease Ron here for a second. He always says he loves all four children the best, but he's forgotten one here.
Well, I'm saving the best for last.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, we, it's funny. I was reading an article this morning about Nestle, the largest food company in the world. And one of the quotes was, they believe that they can not only triple but quadruple their sparkling seltzer business. Now, they're in the non-alcoholic side of the business. But what's interesting, when you go out and see these massive displays at Metropolitan Market and PCC and Whole Foods and QFC here in our backyard, a big chunk of it is in the seltzer space is that blue package. And that blue package is what they call pure or plain. These seltzers that are very versatile, that, really don't have the flavors. It's really one you can decide what you put in it. You can muddle something in it. You could put a splash of cranberry, or you could squeeze some lemon or lime if you want. But it's a very empowering flavor. And it's one that, hopefully this doesn't come the wrong way, but Katie and I can drink all day.
It is clean tasting.
And where do they find this?
Right now you can get it in any Metropolitan Market. You can get it in some QFCs, some Safeway stores, a lot of the independents in convenience stores.
Total Wine.
Total Wine.
Bevmo.
Bevmo, yeah. We're on special right now in a number of those places. And It's been really flattering to see how the consumers showed up for this category and the San Juan brand.
So when you look at this brand, it's not a distilled product. It's made very differently than a distilled product.
Yeah, this is really interesting. At the end of the day, when we started out, we wanted to have the lightest, cleanest, refreshing tasting, if you will, vodka soda tasting product on the marketplace as our base. If we did that, we were hitting kind of the markers that consumers were looking for. Having said this is not a distilled beverage. Legally, the TTB and the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board consider this actually a beer. This is a brewed product. There is no distillation, and we've been able to, work within those regulations to create a unique process where literally we have the lightest, cleanest, most refreshing tasting, vodka soda-ish tasting thing out on the marketplace. And that is a mouthful.
That is a mouthful. But it's one which is growing very fast and finding tremendous acceptance.
Yeah, we're really flattered. It's amazing at this stage, again, having been in this food and beverage space for over 30 years, there's very few times young companies are actually being seduced by the big companies like Safeway and QFC and others to come to them. But we're in that kind of enviable position right now. And the reason why that's happening is not only because the category is hot, but because we have a really unique product, and every place that we've put it, it has outsold any of our expectations.
And I think because you're small, because you're adaptable, and because you're going where no one else goes, you're finding a market that is most valuable.
Well, no doubt about that. And I think we've been really smart. Katie's done a great job bringing us all together. And one of the things that I'm really proud of is how she's brought in our tasting panel, her group of friends. And who
They're
better?
the experts.
That's right. Who better than the people that are out there that were buying the competitors and parallel categories and coming out and saying what they want and what it would take to have them, buy a San Juan seltzer versus any other beverage or alcohol product on the marketplace.
And tweaking it and tweaking the recipes and trying to get the so there's no aftertaste compared to some that have, a different aftertaste at the end. Ours is just clean.
It's a great story, and one that's really remarkable in terms of changing taste and the times they are a-changing, huh?
Yeah, for sure. I spent a lot of my years in the beverage alcohol space in beer and in wine, and literally was heading up marketing for the fastest growing vine wine company in the world over a 3.5 year period, and I've never seen anything like this.
So give a rundown of all the flavors.
Sure. The first one we'll say is pure, since we talked about it. The second, huckleberry.
Pure is
just the base beer, we call it. It is the base vodka soda tasting stuff that, we
do
call
what you want.
Yeah,
do what you want with
anything
it.
you want with it. Put some lavender in it, squeeze a twist of lemon or lime and make it your own.
Okay.
Huckleberry, I think, speaks for itself. The biggest argument we had there, do we call it wild huckleberry or huckleberry? We settled on huckleberry because it fit the package better. The Fuji apple was just an incredible smelling. It's got an incredible nose. Yep. The taste. And what's great about this product, we literally source, the apple natural flavors that come in from Sunnyside, Washington. And then the last but not least flavor is the raspberry cran.
Well, that's a great story, and I hope everybody who's listening will go out and buy a case. Why not?
Well, or two or three or four.
Thanks for being on.
Well, thanks for having us.
So, I want to shift and talk about the markets for a minute. We're in the longest bull market without a correction in history. Talked about it a little bit last week. The Dow was at 66.76 on March 9th, 2009. And since then, the Dow has passed 26,000. It's almost quadrupled. My first radio show on October 28th of 2008 was "We Have Nothing to Fear But Fear Itself." We have had a tremendous, tremendous run. And I don't believe it's over. If you've been listening to the program very long, you know that I believe we're headed to down 100,000. I've been saying that for almost a decade now. Seemed really strange when the Dow was 8,000 or 9,000 to say 100,000. At 26,000, it doesn't seem that far-fetched. I think we're there. September is usually the worst month of the year. What we've seen is in the past few years, September has been one of the better months of the year, and we're off and running again this September. August, in the past couple of years, has been the worst month of the year. August was a really good month. For my clients, we were up a lot in August. So I believe that we're in this period of time. We've got a long way to go. I do believe we'll have corrections. I do believe we could get down as far as a bear market. But I think in the long run, we've got a long way to go, and it's important to stay invested. I believe the studies show that that's also true. And we'll talk more after the break when we come back. And I want to talk about the times they are changing in other ways as too. I want to talk about Silicon Valley when we come back. What's happening in Silicon Valley? So don't go away. We've got a lot to roll. There is so much going on in the world today. And I want to say again, it's important to look forward and not in the rearview mirror. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
The times they were changing. Bob Dylan, 1964, and that was quite a time as well. And it seems like we're living again in one of those times. So I want to talk a little bit. There was an article in The Economist about Silicon Valley, and times are changing there too. When you look at Silicon Valley, 3 of the country's most valuable companies are located in Silicon Valley. Apple and Facebook and Google, all Silicon Valley. You look at some of the others, Airbnb, Tesla, Netflix, Uber, and some of the other giants, all within that small area from San Francisco to San Jose to the East Bay. If you look just at that area, the GDP of Silicon Valley is the 19th largest GDP in the world. A bigger GDP than Switzerland, a bigger GDP than Saudi Arabia. It is huge. Think about it. It was Bill Hewlett and David Packard, Hewlett-Packard, that 80 years ago in a garage started a little company that, of course, grew into Hewlett-Packard. And what they brought to that valley is incredible. The disruptive technology that's been happening, the job creation, the R&D, the silicon, when you think of the products, the smartphones, the silicon chips, the PCs, the engineering expertise, the networks, thriving networks of young entrepreneurs starting businesses, and the financing for those businesses with angel investors and VC investors. You have educational facilities. Stanford is turning out any number of young entrepreneurs and focusing on that. And it's not just Stanford. You have UC and you have many of the educational schools. You have a risk-taking culture there. And probably the most preeminent place in the world for innovation and disruptive technology. But like Bob Dylan said, the times they are changing. In a recent survey, 46% of the respondents said that they intend to move out of the area in the next few years. There are so many startups in other places that there's a takeoff on Broadway. A lot of plays open and play on Broadway, and some of the plays that don't make it on Broadway are called off-Broadway. Now there's a lot of startups that are being called themselves off Silicon Valley, just like off-Broadway, off Silicon Valley. For a startup in Silicon Valley, the cost is almost 4 times what it is in Seattle, for example, or in Miami, or Austin, or Boston. It's expensive. Miami, Florida, is now the number one place for startups. Think about how things have changed. Not Austin, Texas, not Seattle, Miami, Florida. Even for the people that are there and working for companies there, they've created the ability for remote access. So you don't even have to live in the valley to work for a company in the valley. And one of the issues that's raised in the valley these days, of all the startups that are financed by venture capital, only 2% are women who started the startup. Only 2%. 98% are men. The times are changing in the focus of the program. The pay is large, and the startups are moving. The times they are changing. It's Silicon Valley is becoming spread out, and the startups are moving to places like Seattle and Portland. They're moving to Miami. They're moving to Austin, Texas. They're moving to Boston and Los Angeles. The times, they really are changing. But the impact Silicon Valley has had has been huge, and it will continue to be significant throughout this whole thing. But like Bob Dylan said, the times, they are changing. So I believe that we're in a time of growth in the country. We're in a time when things are changing. I also believe it's a buy and hold type thing. Studies have shown that. If you go back, and history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. I believe that. That was something that I believe Mark Twain said. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And I think that you can look back into what's happened and see some patterns which really make sense. Peter Lynch and John Vanderheiden of Fidelity did a study. They found from 1981 to 1991, those 10 years, if you missed just the 10 best days of the market, your returns were 4% versus 14%. Just 10 days, 1 day a year on the average. If you were out of the market 10 days out of 10 years, your returns dropped from 14% to 4%. Carla Freed did the same study in Money Magazine, and some of these studies are getting pretty old now, pretty aged, and I haven't seen any that have been updated, but I would guess updates bring it up to this. Carla Freed did it for Money Magazine in 2007 when she took the numbers from 1982 to 2001, when the Standard & Poor's 500 was up an average of 11.8%. Of course, that was before the Great Recession as well. And if you missed just the best 10 days during those 20 years, your return dropped from 93,000, or if you took 10,000 during that period of time, you would have ended up with 93,000. But if you missed the best 10 days, your return dropped to 56,000. If you missed the best 30 days, your return dropped to 28,000 from 93,000. If you missed the best 50 days, your return dropped from 93,000 to 15,000. People will counter that argument by saying if you can miss the worst days, you get a much better return. The question is, you have to guess which are the worst days. You have to guess which the worst days are going to be. By being in and buying and holding, the idea is you don't have to worry about missing the best days because you get all the best days. Yeah, you get the worst days too, but the total return is much better. And I say buy and hold and be in the market, but the times they are changing as well. Richard Foster of Yale did a study in which he found companies that were in the Standard & Poor's 500 in 1920 had an average life of 70 years. From the time they became part of the Standard & Poor's 500 until they were removed, either because they were merged out or because they died or they became too small. During that period of time, those that were in 1920, they had an average life of 70 years. Today, that period is shortened to 15 years. The time of dominance for companies has been dramatically shortened. When you think about it, think about 1966, the blue chip stocks. 1966, the blue chips, the Dow included, Anaconda Copper, American Can, American Tobacco, Bethlehem Steel, Chrysler, General Foods, Goodyear, Johns Manville, Owens, Illinois, Swift & Company, Sears, Texas, Union Carbide, U.S. Steel, Westinghouse, Electric, and Woolworth. Most of those companies don't exist today. Microsoft, Intel, Southwest Bell, Home Depot, Walmart, McDonald's, all part of the Dow today. They didn't exist in 1966. The times really are changing. It's a matter of buying and holding for a shorter period of time, not a long period of time. But still, it's not day trading that makes the money. It's being in the market. And that wraps us up for today. I will be back next Saturday with more introduction and more times which are a-changing. Have a great rest of the weekend and a good week coming up. That wraps us up for the day.
Listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams, here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adam.